Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The Message That Changed Everything. Keisha stood in her kitchen at 2 a.m, staring at her phone screen like it might disappear if she blinked. The blue light cast shadows across her 53-year-old face, highlighting the tears that wouldn't stop falling. Her hands trembled as she read the message again. Maybe you should just accept that your time has passed, Ma. Nobody wants a woman your age. You're embarrassing yourself. The words came from her own daughter, Bria, posted publicly on Facebook under a photo Keisha had shared. Just a simple selfie in her new red dress, feeling good for the first time in months. The comments from Bria's friends piled on like vultures. She's trying too hard. Somebody tell Grandma to sit down. This is sad. Keisha's chest burned with humiliation so thick she could taste it. She'd raised Bria alone after Marcus left them for a 25-year-old when Bria was just 7. She'd worked double shifts at the hospital, missed sleep, sacrificed her own happiness to give that girl everything. And this was her reward. Public mockery from her own blood. The phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. A direct message notification appeared at the top of her screen. She almost ignored it, assuming it was another person ready to pile on the shame, but something made her click it open. The profile picture showed a white man with silver hair and kind blue eyes, maybe around her age, wearing a flannel shirt and standing in front of mountain peaks. His name was Daniel Whitmore, and the message was simple. I saw what your daughter wrote. I'm sorry people were so cruel. For what it's worth, you look absolutely beautiful in that dress. Red is definitely your color. I hope you don't let their words dim your light. Keisha's breath caught in her throat. She clicked on his profile, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. He lived in Colorado, worked as a wildlife photographer, had a kind smile in every picture. He didn't look like a scammer or a creep. He looked real, and he'd reached out when she felt most invisible. She shouldn't respond. That's what her mind told her. She was too old for this, too tired, too broken from raising kids alone and watching her body change in ways that made her feel like she was disappearing. Her daughter was right, wasn't she? Who was she fooling, trying to feel pretty at 53? But her fingers moved anyway, typing words before her fear could stop them. Thank you. That means more than you know. Today was hard. She hit send and immediately regretted it. What was she doing, talking to a stranger? What if he was playing games? What if this was some joke that would blow up in her face? But then the 3 dots appeared, showing he was typing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. I can imagine. His response came through. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Cancer. For a long time, I thought my chance at feeling alive again was gone. But I've learned something. Life doesn't end just because other people say it should. You deserve to feel beautiful. You deserve to be seen. Keisha sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd fed her kids cereal before school, where she'd paid bills she could barely afford, where she'd cried alone so many nights after Marcus left. The wood was scarred and old just like her, but Daniel's words wrapped around those scars like warm hands. They talked until 4 a.m. He told her about his 2 grown sons, about losing his wife, Sarah, about how he'd learned to find beauty in silence and solitude. She told him about working as a nurse for 30 years, about raising 3 kids on her own, about how invisible she felt now that her body had aged and her children had grown. He listened, really listened, not the way men usually did online, waiting for their turn to talk or steer the conversation towards something sexual. He asked questions. He cared. When she finally put her phone down, the sun was starting to rise through her window. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe her daughter was wrong. Maybe there was still time. But as she climbed into bed, exhaustion pulling her under. She didn't know that Daniel was lying awake in Colorado, staring at her profile picture with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He'd been watching her page for weeks, long before that post went viral. He knew about her daughter's cruelty, about her son's gambling debts, about her lonely Friday nights. He knew everything because he'd made it his business to know. Daniel Whitmore wasn't just some kind stranger sliding into her DMs. He was a man with a plan, a past he'd never mentioned, and a reason for choosing Keisha that had nothing to do with love. The mountains behind him in that profile picture weren't in Colorado. They were in Montana, where he'd buried secrets deeper than anyone could dig. And Keisha, lonely and desperate to feel wanted, had just opened the door. Chapter 2. When Marcus left. 6 months before Daniel's message appeared on her phone, Keisha had been standing in this same kitchen, staring at a different kind of screen, the TV her son Darnell had mounted on the wall. The news showed stories about romance scams, about lonely women losing their savings to men who promised love through pixels and carefully typed words. Her best friend Rhonda sat beside her on the couch, shaking her head. "Girl, that's why I don't do none of that online mess," Rhonda said, waving her hand. "These men out here ain't worth the data they use up." Keisha had laughed then, agreeing, promising herself she'd never be desperate enough to fall for pretty lies from a stranger. But that was before the loneliness got so heavy it felt like drowning. That was before she realized her children barely called unless they needed money, and her body had become invisible to the world. The TV screen flickered with images of crying women, empty bank accounts, shattered dreams. Keisha thought she was smarter than that. She thought she'd know a predator when she saw one. The truth was, Keisha had been lonely since the day Marcus walked out 20 years ago. She could still remember the sound of his suitcase wheels rolling across their bedroom floor, the way he wouldn't look at her when he said he needed something she couldn't give him anymore. "You let yourself go, Keish," he'd said, like her body was a house she'd stopped maintaining. "I need someone who makes me feel alive." She'd been 33 then, with stretch marks from carrying his babies and exhaustion written into every line of her face. He left for Amber, a dental hygienist with smooth skin and no children to weigh her down. Keisha had cried for months, then dried her tears and raised their kids alone. She worked night shifts at County General Hospital, came home to cook breakfast, slept 3 hours, and did it all again. Her body aged fast under that pressure. Her face grew tired. Her hands developed arthritis. And somewhere along the way, she stopped believing anyone would look at her with desire again. Bria was the worst of her 3 children, though Keisha hated admitting it. The girl had her father's sharp tongue and his talent for finding your weakest spot and pressing until you bled. Keisha's 2 sons, Darnell and Jamal, were easier, distant but not cruel. They called on holidays, remembered her birthday most years, borrowed money they forgot to pay back. But Bria treated her mother like an embarrassment, a reminder of what women became when they weren't careful. Bria was 28, childless by choice, and engaged to a tech developer named Kyle, who barely acknowledged Keisha's existence. "You and Kyle still planning that Christmas wedding?" Keisha had asked last month, trying to bridge the distance between them. Bria's response had been ice cold. "If we do, please don't post about it on social media. Your Facebook is embarrassing, Ma. All those inspirational quotes and selfies, it's giving desperate." The words had cut deep, but Keisha swallowed them like she always did, smiling through the pain. She'd posted that selfie in the red dress to prove something to herself, that she was still here, still worthy of being seen. She bought the dress on sale at Macy's, the kind of purchase she usually talked herself out of because the money should go toward bills. But that day, standing in the dressing room under fluorescent lights that showed every flaw, She looked at herself and decided to be brave. The dress hugged curves she'd been taught to hide. The color made her brown skin glow. She'd felt pretty for the first time in years. So she took the picture in her bathroom mirror, added a simple caption, "Feeling good today," and hit post. Within an hour, Bria had turned her moment of joy into a public execution. The comments came fast. "At her age, put it away, Grandma. This is why older women need to stay off social media." Each notification was a knife. Each laugh emoji was a wound. Keisha had deleted the post after 2 hours, but the damage was done. The shame had already crawled inside her. That night, before Daniel's message arrived, Keisha had stood in front of her bathroom mirror again, but this time she wasn't feeling good. She was counting her failures. The gray hair she could no longer afford to dye every month. The belly that refused to flatten no matter how many walks she took. The face that her own daughter found embarrassing. She'd whisper to her reflection, "Maybe they're right. Maybe it's time to disappear." She thought about deactivating her Facebook, throwing away the red dress, accepting that her story was over. At 53, with no husband, no romance, and children who barely respected her, what was left? The question sat heavy in her chest as she climbed into bed. She didn't know that across the country, a man was crafting a message designed to make her feel seen again. She didn't know that her loneliness had made her visible to exactly the wrong person. She closed her eyes and prayed for something to change, and God, in his mysterious way, was about to answer, but not how she expected. Chapter 3, Daniel's World. Daniel Whitmore sat in his cabin outside Whitefish, Montana, surrounded by photographs he'd never shown anyone. The walls were covered with images of women, not the wildlife shots he posted online, but portraits of lonely faces he'd collected over years. Women in their 50s and 60s, women whose children had grown distant, women whose husbands had left or died, women like Keisha. He studied her Facebook profile with the focus of a hunter tracking prey. She worked at County General Hospital in Detroit, posted about her grandkids occasionally, shared quotes about strength and faith that told him everything he needed to know. She was a believer. She was tired. She was exactly what he needed. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced ease, crafting messages that would make her feel special without triggering her defenses. The key was patience. The key was making her think it was her idea to fall. Outside his window, snow covered the mountains in white silence, and inside, Daniel smiled. His real name wasn't Daniel Whitmore. That identity belonged to a real wildlife photographer who died in a car accident 3 years ago. A man with no family, no social media presence, just a portfolio of beautiful images and an obituary that mentioned he'd lost his wife to cancer. The perfect cover story, the man sitting in this cabin was actually Derek Winston, a con artist who'd been running romance scams since 2015, accumulating over $2 million from women who'd believed his lies. He'd learned early that the best targets weren't young and naive, they were mature and lonely, women who'd stopped believing in fairy tales but desperately wanted to. These women had savings, they had equity in their homes, they had retirement accounts they'd guard fiercely against obvious scams, but would slowly drain if they believed they were investing in real love. Derek had perfected his approach. Find a widow or divorcee, study her social media, craft a persona that matched her dreams, then slowly build trust before introducing a crisis that required money. Keisha was different from his usual targets in one important way. She was Black, and he'd never run a long con on a Black woman before. His previous victims had all been white, mostly because he thought they'd be easier to manipulate, less suspicious of a white man's attention. But Keisha's profile had appeared in his feed 6 months ago through some algorithm he didn't understand, and something about her had caught his attention. Maybe it was the sadness in her eyes despite her smile. Maybe it was the way she talked about faith and perseverance like an armor against a world that had beaten her down. Maybe it was the daughter who publicly humiliated her, creating the perfect emotional wound he could exploit. Whatever it was, Derek saw opportunity. He saw a woman hungry for validation, starved for respect, desperate to prove she was still worthy of love. He saw someone he could drain completely if he played the game right. He'd spent weeks preparing for this moment. He studied her posts going back 5 years, learned about Marcus leaving her, about Darnell's gambling problem, about Jamal's baby mama drama, about Bria's cruelty. He memorized the names of her co-workers she mentioned, the church she attended occasionally, the grocery store she checked into on Foursquare. He learned she loved Tyler Perry movies, gospel music, and murder mystery shows. He learned she sent money to her sister in Atlanta every month and paid her mother's assisted living bills. He learned she had $17,000 in savings, not a fortune, but enough for what he needed. Most importantly, he learned she believed in redemption, in second chances, in the power of God to send blessings when you least expected them. That faith would be his greatest weapon. All he had to do was position himself as the answer to her prayers, and she'd hand him everything willingly. The message about her daughter's cruelty had been his opening move, carefully designed to make him seem different from other men. He wasn't sliding into her DMs with compliments about her body or crude suggestions. He was offering empathy, understanding, emotional safety. The story about his dead wife, Sarah, was fiction, borrowed from the real Daniel Whitmore's life and polished until it gleamed with authentic grief. Women like Keisha didn't want perfection. They wanted someone who'd survived pain and could understand theirs. The mountains in his profile picture were real, but he'd never photographed wildlife in his life. Those images belonged to the dead man whose identity he'd stolen. Everything about Daniel Whitmore was a carefully constructed lie, from his kind blue eyes, enhanced with colored contacts, to his silver hair, dyed to look distinguished. The man Keisha was falling for didn't exist, but by the time she realized that Derek would have everything he needed, and she'd be too ashamed to tell anyone how completely she'd been fooled. Outside, snow continued to fall on the Montana mountains, covering everything in pristine white. Inside his cabin, Derek closed his laptop and smiled. The first message had been sent. Keisha had responded. The game was beginning. He'd done this 17 times before, refined his approach with each victim until it was nearly perfect. This time would be no different. In 3 months, maybe 4, Keisha would be in love with Daniel Whitmore. She'd believe in his crisis, his emergency, his desperate need for her help. She'd drain her savings, maybe take out a loan, while believing she was investing in their future together. And when it was over, when he disappeared and she realized the truth, she'd be too humiliated to report it. Women like her never did. They blamed themselves, carried the shame silently, and tried to rebuild from nothing. It was perfect. It was foolproof. And Keisha, lonely and desperate to feel wanted, was walking straight into his trap with her eyes closed and her heart wide open. Chapter 4, the first conversation. Keisha's phone became her lifeline over the next 2 weeks. She and Daniel texted every day, long conversations that stretched through her lunch breaks at the hospital and kept her up past midnight. He told her about photographing grizzly bears in Yellowstone, about the way morning light hit the mountains, about grief and learning to live again after loss. She told him about her patients, about the woman in room 412 who reminded her of her grandmother, about feeling invisible in a world that worshipped youth. Their conversations felt different from anything she'd experienced. He asked about her dreams, not just her day. He wanted to know what made her laugh as a child, what songs made her cry, what she'd do if money wasn't an issue. Nobody had asked her those questions in decades. Marcus had stopped caring about her inner world years before he left. Her children only called when they needed something. But Daniel listened like her words were treasures he was collecting. On the 13th day, he asked if they could video chat. Keisha panicked. The messaging felt safe because she could edit herself, choose her words carefully, hide behind text. But video meant he'd see her, really see her, and she wasn't sure she could handle the disappointment in his eyes when he realized she wasn't as pretty as her carefully angled selfies suggested. "I don't know," she typed back, her thumb hovering over the send button. "My house is a mess right now." It was a lie. Her house was immaculate because cleaning was how she handled anxiety. But the real mess was her face without makeup, her body without carefully chosen clothes, the truth of her age without filters. Daniel's response came quickly. "Keisha, I don't care about your house. I care about seeing your smile in real time, but only if you're comfortable. No pressure." The kindness in his words made her chest ache. She spent an hour getting ready, applying makeup with shaking hands, changing outfits 4 times before settling on a simple blue sweater that didn't try too hard. When his face appeared on her screen, her breath caught. He was even more handsome than his picture suggested, with crinkles around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "There she is," he said, his voice warm and rich like honey. "Even more beautiful than I imagined." Keisha felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to being looked at like that, like she was something precious instead of something tolerated. They talked for 3 hours that first video call. He showed her around his cabin, the wood-burning stove, the photographs covering his walls. She showed him her small house in Detroit, the kitchen where she'd raised her kids, the backyard where she grew tomatoes in the summer. It felt intimate in a way that scared her. She was letting him see her real life, not the edited version she presented to the world. And he wasn't running. He wasn't making excuses to end the call. He was leaning closer to his camera, asking questions, making her feel seen in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Rhonda noticed the change immediately. "Girl, why are you smiling at your phone like that?" her best friend asked during their lunch break at the hospital. They sat in the cafeteria picking at salads they'd brought from home because the hospital food was garbage. Keisha tried to play it cool, but Rhonda knew her too well. "It's nothing, just talking to someone." Rhonda's eyebrows shot up. "Someone? What kind of someone?" Keisha told her about Daniel, the photographer from Colorado, the widower with kind eyes, the man who made her feel beautiful. Rhonda's expression shifted from excitement to concern. "Keisha, baby, you need to be careful. You know how these internet men are. They'll sweet talk you right out your savings." Keisha bristled at the warning. Why couldn't Rhonda just be happy for her? "It's not like that. He's genuine. We video chat. I've seen his house, his life. He's not some scammer." Rhonda reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "I'm not trying to rain on your parade. I just don't want to see you hurt." But Keisha was already in too deep to hear warnings. That night, Daniel sent her flowers. A huge bouquet of red roses delivered to her house with a card that read, "For the woman who deserves to be celebrated every day." She cried when she opened the door and saw them, not because of the flowers themselves, but because of what they represented. Someone was thinking about her. Someone was making an effort. Someone believed she was worth celebrating. She took a picture and posted it on Facebook with the caption, "Sometimes God sends blessings when you least expect them." Within minutes, Bria commented, "Who sent you flowers? Some scammer trying to get your pension?" The words were meant to her, and they did, but Keisha deleted the comment and blocked her daughter from seeing her posts. She was done letting Bria steal her joy. She was done shrinking herself to make others comfortable. If her daughter couldn't be happy for her, then Bria didn't deserve to witness her happiness. That night, talking to Daniel until 2 a.m, Keisha felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. It felt like hope. It felt like love. It felt like falling. Chapter 5, The Crack in the Mirror. 3 weeks into their daily conversations, Daniel dropped his first crisis. It came carefully, wrapped in vulnerability, and delivered with perfect timing. They were video chatting on a Saturday night, Keisha in her pajamas, Daniel in a flannel shirt that made his eyes look impossibly blue. He seemed distracted, running his hands through his silver hair more than usual. "You okay?" Keisha asked, leaning closer to her phone screen. You seem stressed. He sighed, and she watched something like shame cross his face. I didn't want to burden you with this. We've been having such good conversations, and I don't want to ruin what we're building by dumping my problems on you. Her heart clenched. Daniel, you can tell me anything. That's what friends do. That's what people who care about each other do. He looked directly into the camera, and she could swear she saw tears forming. My son Ryan is in trouble. He got into a car accident last week, and his insurance is fighting the claim. The medical bills are piling up, and I've been trying to help him, but my accounts are tied up in investments right now. I can't touch them without penalties. I'll figure it out. I always do. Keisha felt a twist of concern in her stomach. How much does he need? The question left her mouth before she could think it through, before Rhonda's warnings could echo in her head. Daniel shook his head quickly. No, Keisha, that's not why I told you. I would never ask you for money. Please don't think that's what this is about. His response felt genuine, almost offended, and that's exactly what silenced her suspicions. If he'd been trying to scam her, wouldn't he have jumped at her offer? I'm just saying, Keisha pressed. If he needs help and you're tied up right now, maybe I could loan you something just until your investment's clear. Daniel's face transformed, relief mixed with reluctance, gratitude battling pride. I couldn't. That's not fair to you. They went back and forth for 20 minutes, Keisha insisting, Daniel refusing, until finally he said the magic words, you have the kindest heart. If you're sure, just maybe $2,000, I'll pay you back within the month. $2,000. It was a chunk of her savings, but not enough to devastate her. And he said he'd pay it back. She sent the money the next morning through Cash App, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed confirm. It was the first time she'd ever sent money to someone she'd never met in person, but it didn't feel like a transaction between strangers. It felt like helping someone she cared about, someone who'd brought light back into her life when she was drowning in darkness. Daniel's gratitude came through in a voice message that made her eyes water. Keisha, I don't know how to thank you. You have no idea what this means to me and my son. You're an angel, a literal angel sent when I needed faith in humanity restored. She listened to that message 3 times, letting his words wrap around her like a blanket. This was what love felt like at their age. Not wild passion, but steady support. Not games, but showing up when it mattered. She felt good about helping him. She felt needed in a way her own children never made her feel. Bria found out 3 days later, Keisha had made the mistake of mentioning Daniel during Sunday dinner at Darnell's house. Her sons were there with their families, and for once, Bria had shown up without Kyle. So, Ma's got a boyfriend now, Darnell teased, grinning at her across the table. That's what's up. You deserve to be happy. But Bria's fork clattered against her plate. A boyfriend? You mean that white man from the internet you've been posting about? Keisha felt her defenses rise. His name is Daniel, and yes, we've been talking. He's a good man. Bria laughed, sharp and mean. Ma, please tell me you're not sending this stranger money. Please tell me you're not that naive. The table went quiet. Keisha's face burned with humiliation. I helped him with something. That's what people do when they care about each other, but it's none of your business. Bria leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. You're being scammed. That's literally the playbook. Old lonely woman meets charming man online. He creates a crisis. She sends money. How much did you give him? The question hung in the air like poison. Jamal cleared his throat uncomfortably. Darnell looked at his plate. Keisha felt tears prickling behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. $2,000? And he's paying me back? Bria's expression shifted from anger to something worse. Pity. Ma, listen to yourself. You don't even know this man's real name. You've never met him. And you just handed over $2,000? What happens when he comes back and needing more? What happens when that $2,000 becomes $10,000? Keisha stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. You know what, Bria? Just because nobody wants to love you for who you are, just because Kyle barely looks at you, doesn't mean I have to stay lonely and miserable too. I'm happy. For the first time in years, I feel like someone actually sees me. And if you can't support that, then I don't need to be here. She grabbed her purse and walked out, leaving stunned silence behind her. In her car, she finally let the tears come, but they weren't tears of doubt. They were tears of rage. How dare Bria question her judgment? How dare her own daughter make her feel stupid for believing in love? That night, she told Daniel what happened. He listened quietly as she vented about her daughter's cruelty, about feeling attacked for daring to be happy. When she finished, his voice came through soft and understanding. I'm sorry she hurt you, but Keisha, maybe this is a sign that we need to meet in person. I don't want your family thinking I'm hiding behind a screen. I want them to see that what we have is real. Her heart leaped. You want to meet? He laughed gently. Of course I do. I've been wanting to suggest it, but I didn't want to rush you. What if I fly to Detroit next month? We could spend a weekend together, go to dinner, let me meet your family if you want. Let me prove to your daughter that I'm exactly who I say I am. Keisha felt validation flood through her chest. See? A scammer wouldn't offer to meet in person. A scammer wouldn't suggest meeting her family. Bria was wrong. They were all wrong. I'd love that, she whispered, already imagining introducing Daniel to her children, watching their skepticism transform into acceptance. Then it's settled, Daniel said. Start looking forward to it, beautiful. I can't wait to hold you in person. Chapter 6. The money gets deeper. Daniel's flight was supposed to arrive on Friday, November 1st. Keisha had cleaned her house until it sparkled, bought new sheets for her guest room, though she secretly hoped he wouldn't need it, and picked out outfits for every possible scenario. She'd requested the weekend off from the hospital for the first time in 3 years. Rhonda had rolled her eyes, but agreed to cover her shift, muttering something about hoping Keisha wouldn't regret this. The night before his arrival, Keisha couldn't sleep. She lay in bed imagining what it would feel like to hug him, to sit across from him at dinner, to prove to everyone that her faith in him was justified. At 3 a.m, her phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. Her stomach dropped. Nobody called at 3 a.m. with good news. Hello? Her voice came out thick with sleep and sudden fear. Keisha, I'm so sorry to wake you. He sounded wrecked, his voice breaking. Something terrible happened. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What's wrong? Are you okay? She heard him take a shaky breath, like he was trying not to cry. I'm at the hospital with Ryan. He had a setback, infection from the accident. They're saying he needs emergency surgery, but my insurance is denying coverage because they're claiming pre-existing conditions. I don't know what to do. The surgery costs $15,000 and they need payment up front before they'll operate. Keisha sat up in bed, fully awake now. $15,000? The number echoed in her head like a warning bell. That was nearly all of her savings. Daniel, that's a lot of money. Can't you take out a loan or sell something? She heard her own words and hated them. Here was a man she claimed to love whose son was dying, and she was talking about loans. But $15,000 wasn't something you just handed over to someone you'd never physically met. Was it? I've tried everything, he said, and she could hear genuine desperation in his voice. The banks won't process anything this fast. My investment advisor says it'll take 2 weeks minimum to free up my funds. Ryan doesn't have 2 weeks. The infection is spreading. Keisha, I know what I'm asking is insane. I know we haven't met yet. If you can't help, I understand. She closed her eyes, and behind her eyelids, she saw Bria's face at Sunday dinner, heard her daughter's voice. That's literally the playbook. But she also remembered Daniel's kindness, his daily good morning texts, the way he listened to her talk about work without zoning out. She thought about the flowers, about feeling beautiful for the first time in years. How would I send it? The question came out before she could stop it. Daniel went quiet for a moment. I can't ask you to do this. But he'd already asked, hadn't he? That's what this call was. If I send it, you'll pay me back when your investment's clear and you'll still come to Detroit. She heard the plea in her own voice, the desperation to believe this was real. I swear to you, Keisha, I'll have the money back to you within 3 weeks. And yes, I'll be on the next flight to Detroit after Ryan's stable. I promise you, baby. I promise on everything I am, baby. He'd never called her that before. The word melted something in her chest, made her feel young and wanted. Okay, tell me what to do. He walked her through setting up a wire transfer to an account he said belonged to the hospital's billing department. She logged into her bank's website with shaking hands, watching her savings account balance drop from $17,000 to $2,000 in a single click. The money disappeared into the digital void, and with it, any safety net she'd built over 30 years of working double shifts and skipping vacations. When it was done, she felt sick. Not because she doubted him. She couldn't let herself doubt him now, but because she just bet everything on a man she'd never touched. Did it go through? Daniel's voice pulled her back. Yes, it's done. She heard him exhale, heard what sounded like a sob of relief. Thank you, God, Keisha, thank you. You just saved my son's life. I will never forget this, never. They stayed on the phone for another hour while he waited for the hospital to confirm payment. When they finally hung up, Keisha sat in her dark bedroom and tried to ignore the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like Rhonda. Girl, what have you done? She didn't tell anyone about the money. Not Rhonda, who would have screamed at her. Not her sons, who would have been disappointed. And definitely not Bria, who would have said, I told you so, until Keisha wanted to disappear. She went to work that Friday, the day Daniel was supposed to arrive, moving through her shift like a ghost. She checked her phone obsessively, waiting for updates about Ryan's surgery, about Daniel's flight, about when she'd see him. The updates came in scattered text messages. Surgery went well, thank God. Still waiting for him to wake up from anesthesia. I need to stay another day or two to make sure he's stable. Each message made sense individually, but together they formed a pattern Keisha didn't want to see. By Sunday night, when Daniel still hadn't mentioned rebooking his flight, she felt the first real crack in her faith. When do you think you'll be able to come to Detroit? She texted, trying to keep her tone light. His response came an hour later. Soon, beautiful. I promise. Just need to make sure Ryan's okay first. You understand, right? She typed back, of course. But she didn't understand. Not really. And in her gut, in that place where women always know the truth before their hearts catch up, Keisha knew something was very wrong. Chapter 7. The Unraveling. Rhonda found her crying in the hospital bathroom 2 weeks later. Keisha had been hiding there for 20 minutes, mascara running down her face, trying to pull herself together before her shift ended. Daniel's 3-week payback deadline had come and gone. He'd stopped answering video calls, claiming his camera was broken. His texts had become shorter, less frequent, always with excuses about Ryan's recovery or problems with his bank. And Keisha's savings account sat at $2,000, barely enough to cover her mortgage and bills for another month. Baby, what's wrong? Rhonda locked the bathroom door behind her, pulling Keisha into a hug. Talk to me. The whole story came pouring out. The $15,000, the surgery, the broken promises, the creeping suspicion that she'd been the world's biggest fool. Rhonda didn't say I told you so. She just held Keisha while she sobbed, rubbing her back like she was a child. We need to report this, Rhonda finally said. File a police report, contact the FBI. They handle internet fraud. But Keisha shook her head violently. I can't. Everyone will know. Bria will know she was right. I can't handle that humiliation. That night, Keisha did something she should have done weeks ago. She started digging into Daniel Whitmore's digital footprint. She reverse image searched his profile pictures and felt her stomach drop when they appeared on a memorial page for a wildlife photographer who died in 2022. The real Daniel Whitmore had been married to Sarah for 30 years. They lived in Oregon, not Colorado. He died in a car accident on Highway 101, leaving behind 2 sons and a legacy of beautiful nature photography. The man she'd been talking to had stolen a dead man's identity, his pictures, his life story. She sat frozen in front of her laptop screen, staring at the obituary, feeling something inside her break completely. She'd given $15,000, most of her life savings, to a ghost, to a lie, to a man who'd studied her loneliness like a textbook and knew exactly which wounds to press. She'd been so desperate to feel wanted that she'd ignored every red flag, every warning, every instinct that tried to protect her. She called the number Daniel had been using, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. She sent texts that turned green, meaning he'd blocked her. She tried to log into the Cash App account where she'd sent the first $2,000, but it had been deleted. Every digital thread that connected her to him had been severed, leaving her with nothing but screenshots of conversations and a devastating hole in her bank account. The worst part wasn't the money, though losing it felt like someone had reached into her chest and ripped out her security. The worst part was the shame, the bone-deep, soul-crushing shame of knowing she'd been exactly the stereotype Bria had accused her of being, an old, desperate woman who'd fallen for the oldest trick in the book. She thought she was special, thought her connection with Daniel was different, but she'd just been marked number 18, another lonely woman in a long line of victims, another payday for a predator who'd never felt a single emotion he'd claimed. She made it 4 days before Bria found out. Keisha had been avoiding family calls, but Darnell showed up at her house Wednesday night, concerned because she hadn't answered his text. He found her in bed at 7 p.m., still in her scrubs, staring at nothing. "Ma, what's going on? You sick?" She couldn't lie to her son's worried face. The truth came out in broken sentences. The money, the lies, the stolen identity, all of it. Darnell's expression shifted from concern to anger. "I'm calling Bria and Jamal. We're handling this together." Within an hour, all 3 of her children sat in her living room, and Keisha had never felt smaller. Bria didn't say "I told you so," but her silence was somehow worse, heavy with judgment and disappointment. Jamal looked like he might cry. Darnell paced the room like he wanted to punch something. "We need to file a police report," Darnell said. "Tonight, right now." But Keisha shook her head. "What's the point? The money's gone. The man doesn't exist. I'm just another stupid old woman who fell for a romance scam." "Stop calling yourself stupid," Bria said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You're not stupid, you're lonely. And that bastard weaponized your loneliness against you." Keisha looked at her daughter, surprised. This was the kindest tone Bria had used with her in months. "I'm sorry," Keisha whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't listen to you. You were right. You were right about everything." Bria moved from her chair to sit beside her mother on the couch, taking her hand. "I wasn't trying to be right, Ma. I was trying to protect you, and I should have done it with more love instead of judgment. I'm sorry, too." They filed the police report that night. The officer who took their statement was sympathetic but honest. The chances of recovering the money were slim. These scammers operated internationally, using fake identities and untraceable accounts. They moved money through multiple banks before victims realized what happened. Keisha's $15,000 was probably already split between offshore accounts, converted to cryptocurrency, scattered across the digital universe like ashes. "We'll investigate," the officer promised, "but I want you to prepare yourself for the likelihood that you won't see that money again." Keisha nodded, numb. She'd already known. She'd known the moment she found the obituary. The money was gone. but worse. Her trust was gone. Her faith in love was gone. Her hope that someone could want her for who she was, not what she could give them, was gone. And she didn't know how to rebuild from that kind of devastation. Chapter 8, Rock Bottom. The hospital put Keisha on administrative leave 3 days after the police report. Not because she'd done anything wrong at work, but because she'd broken down sobbing in front of a patient's family and couldn't stop. Her supervisor, a kind woman named Margaret, had gently suggested she take 2 weeks to sort out personal matters. Keisha knew what that meant. They thought she was having a breakdown. Maybe she was. She couldn't sleep without seeing Daniel's face, couldn't eat without feeling sick, couldn't look at her bank account without wanting to scream. She worked her entire adult life, sacrificed everything for her children, saved every penny she could, and one cruel stranger had erased 3 decades of struggle in less than a month. The shame was eating her alive. She stopped answering Rhonda's calls. She ignored her children's texts. She sat in her house with the curtains drawn, scrolling through the fake conversations with Daniel, trying to pinpoint the exact moment she should have known. But there was no single moment. There was just loneliness and a man who'd known exactly how to exploit it. On the 5th day of her leave, someone knocked on her door. Keisha ignored it, but the knocking continued, persistent and annoying. Finally, she dragged herself off the couch and opened the door to find Rhonda standing there with grocery bags and a determined expression. "I know you don't want company, but too bad. I'm not watching my best friend disappear into depression." Rhonda pushed past her into the house, immediately opening curtains and windows, letting sunlight flood the dark rooms. "When's the last time you ate something?" Keisha couldn't remember. "I'm not hungry." Rhonda started unpacking groceries, fresh fruit, sandwich supplies, ingredients for soup. "You're gonna eat anyway, and then you're gonna shower, 'cause girl, no offense, but you smell like you've given up." The bluntness should have offended Keisha, but instead it made her laugh. A small broken sound, but a laugh nonetheless. "I did give up," she admitted. "I lost everything, Rhonda. I'm 53 years old with $2,000 to my name and a mortgage I can't pay next month. I'm going to lose my house." Rhonda stopped unpacking and turned to face her. "Then we'll figure it out. You'll take out a loan, pick up extra shifts, do whatever you need to do. But you're not giving up, Keisha. That bastard already took your money. Don't let him take your spirit, too." They spent the afternoon cooking together, Rhonda filling the silence with hospital gossip and stories about her teenage grandson's latest drama. Keisha felt herself slowly coming back to life, like a plant that had been dying of thirst, finally getting water. That evening, sitting at her kitchen table eating homemade chicken soup, she made a decision. "I want to tell my story," she said suddenly. "I want to warn other women so this doesn't happen to them." Rhonda looked up from her bowl. "You sure? That means admitting what happened publicly. That means facing judgment." Keisha nodded. "I've been carrying shame because I thought this was my fault, but it wasn't. He's been doing this to women for years. How many others are out there right now too embarrassed to speak up? Maybe if I'm brave enough to own what happened, someone else won't fall for the same lies." She started writing that night, not a police report, but a Facebook post. She wrote about loneliness, about what it feels like to be a woman over 50 in a world that treats you like you're invisible. She wrote about Daniel Whitmore, the stolen identity, the $15,000, all of it. She wrote about the shame and the heartbreak and the lessons she'd learned about predators who hunt the vulnerable. "I'm posting this not for pity, but for prevention," she typed. "If my story saves one woman from making my mistake, then losing that money wasn't completely meaningless." Her finger hovered over the share button for 10 minutes. This would make her embarrassment public. Bria's friends would see it. Her co-workers would know. Everyone would know that Keisha had been desperate and foolish and naive. But staying silent felt worse. Staying silent meant Derek Winston, or whatever his real name was, would find his next victim without anyone warning her. She pressed share. Within an hour, the post had 50 comments. Some were supportive, some were judgment disguised as concern. But several were private messages from other women saying, "This almost happened to me," or "Thank you for being brave enough to speak up." One message came from a woman named Patricia in Ohio, who lost $8,000 to the same man using a different name and pictures. Another came from Sandra in California, who lost $22,000. They started a group chat comparing stories, finding patterns in how he manipulated each of them. The playbook was almost identical. Study their social media, craft a persona that matched their dreams, build trust slowly, introduce a crisis that required money, promise repayment, then disappear. Each woman thought she was special, thought her connection with him was unique. But they'd all been reading from the same script, performing in the same tragedy with different names. Together, they compiled everything they knew about their scammer and sent it to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. They shared his various aliases, the phone numbers he'd used, the bank account information, everything. It probably wouldn't lead to his arrest. Men like him were ghosts, impossible to catch. But it felt like doing something instead of nothing. It felt like fighting back. And for the first time since she'd sent that $15,000, Keisha felt something other than shame. She felt angry, and anger, she was learning, was so much more powerful than despair. Bria showed up that weekend with groceries and her checkbook. "I'm not letting you lose your house, Ma. I'm covering your mortgage for the next 3 months while you figure things out." Keisha's eyes filled with tears. "Baby, you don't have to do that." Bria sat down beside her. "Yes, I do. I was cruel to you when you needed support. I made you feel like being lonely was something to be ashamed of, and that pushed you towards someone who used that shame against you. I'm sorry, Ma. I'm so sorry I wasn't kinder." They held each other and cried. Two women learning that love sometimes means admitting you were wrong. Darnell and Jamal set up a GoFundMe to help with expenses, something Keisha initially protested but eventually accepted. Her church community donated. Her co-workers donated. People she barely knew donated. Within a week, they'd raised $6,000. It wasn't the $15,000 she'd lost, but it was enough to keep her afloat while she rebuilt. And more than the money, the outpouring of support reminded her that she wasn't alone. She'd been so focused on romantic love that she'd forgotten about the other kinds. Friendship love, family love, community love, those were real. Those couldn't be faked through a screen. Chapter 9, The Real Man Shows Up. 8 weeks after Derek Winston disappeared with her money, Keisha received a message request on Facebook from someone named Michael Chin. The profile picture showed an Asian man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle smile. The message read, "Ms. Keisha, you don't know me, but I was one of Derek Winston's victims too. Not financially. I'm the brother of a woman he scammed out of $32,000 before she took her own life. I've been tracking him for 2 years, and I think I found him. I'm in Detroit for work and wondered if you'd be willing to meet. I want to bring him to justice, and I need your help." Keisha's hand shook as she read the message. She almost deleted it, assuming it was another scam, another lie. But something about the specificity, the mention of his sister's suicide, the request to meet in person, made her pause. She called Darnell and told him about the message. "I'm going with you," he said immediately. "If this is real, you're not handling it alone. And if it's another scam, he's gonna have to deal with me." They met Michael at a Coney Island diner on 8 Mile, a public place with lots of witnesses. Darnell sat beside Keisha, his jaw tight, ready to protect his mother from whatever fresh hell was about to unfold. But Michael wasn't a scammer. He was exactly who he claimed to be. A grieving brother carrying a thick folder of documentation about Derek Winston's crimes. "My sister Lily was 57. Michael said, spreading papers across the diner table. Divorced, lonely, working as a teacher in Sacramento. Derek found her on a Christian singles site, used the name Marcus Peterson, claimed to be a missionary who needed help funding a school in Guatemala. She gave him everything: her retirement savings, a loan against her house, $32,000 total. When she realized the truth, she couldn't handle the shame. She left a note saying she was too embarrassed to keep living. His voice cracked, and Keisha reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry." Michael wiped his eyes. "I've spent 2 years tracking him. He's used at least 12 different identities, scammed over 40 women that I can verify, stolen somewhere around $3 million. But I finally found him. He's living in Montana under his real name now." Keisha felt her heart stop. "You know where he is?" Michael pulled out a photograph, a surveillance photo showing a man leaving a grocery store in Whitefish, Montana. He looked nothing like Daniel Whitmore. This man was heavy-set with dark hair and no silver fox charm, just an ordinary-looking white guy who could be anyone's neighbor. But the profile matched the timeline and the location of Derek's cabin. "I've been working with a private investigator," Michael explained. "We've built a solid case, but we need more victims to come forward. The FBI won't prioritize this unless they see the full scale of his operation. I've contacted 6 women so far, and they're all willing to testify. With your story added, we'd have enough evidence to push for federal charges. Wire fraud, identity theft, racketeering. He'd be looking at serious prison time." Darnell leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" Michael looked at Keisha. "I need you to be willing to tell your story in detail to federal investigators. I need you to share your documentation, bank records, screenshots, everything. And I need you to stand up in court if it comes to that and say what he did to you." The thought of standing in front of a courtroom and admitting her shame to strangers made Keisha's stomach turn. But then she thought about Michael's sister, about a woman so devastated by betrayal that death seemed easier than survival. She thought about Patricia and Sandra and the other women in her support group who were still struggling to rebuild their lives. She thought about the next victim Derek was probably grooming right now. Some lonely woman scrolling through Facebook at midnight, desperate to feel wanted. "I'll do it," Keisha said. "Whatever you need, I'll do it." Michael exhaled in relief. "Thank you. I know this is hard, but you're helping prevent him from destroying more lives." They spent 3 hours at that diner, going through Keisha's documentation, building her case file. Darnell took notes, asked questions, made sure Michael's story checked out. By the end, Keisha felt something she hadn't felt since Daniel first messaged her. Hope. Not hope for romance or fairy tale endings, but hope for justice. Hope that her pain might protect someone else. Hope that the man who'd stolen her money and her dignity might finally face consequences. That night, the FBI contacted her. Michael's private investigator had already submitted the compiled evidence, and they were opening a formal investigation into Derek Winston's romance scam operation. An agent named Rodriguez explained they'd been aware of him peripherally, but hadn't had enough cooperative victims to build a strong case. "Women in these situations often don't report because of embarrassment," Agent Rodriguez said over the phone. "Your willingness to come forward is crucial. We're going to need detailed statements, financial records, and your testimony. Are you prepared for that?" Keisha thought about all the reasons to say no. The public exposure, the judgment, the pain of reliving her stupidity. But then she thought about who she wanted to be at 53. Did she want to be a woman who hid from her mistakes? Or did she want to be a woman who stood up, admitted she'd been hurt, and fought to make sure others wouldn't be? "I'm prepared," she said. "Tell me what you need." Agent Rodriguez outlined the next steps: formal interviews, documentation review, possible grand jury testimony. It would take months, maybe over a year before anything went to trial, but they were confident they could build a case. Derek Winston's days of preying on lonely women were numbered. 2 weeks later, the FBI raided Derek Winston's cabin in Montana. They found hard drives full of victim profiles, scripts he'd used on different women, spreadsheets tracking how much money he'd extracted from each target, and evidence of bank accounts in 7 different countries. They arrested him on 16 federal charges, with more expected as they continued investigating. The news made national headlines. Romance scammer arrested after 2-year investigation. Victims come forward to share stories of betrayal. Keisha was interviewed by local Detroit news stations, by online publications, by podcasts focused on true crime. Each time she told her story, it hurt a little less. Each time she said out loud that she'd been scammed, the shame loosened its grip. She wasn't stupid. She was human. She wanted love and had been targeted by someone who understood that desire and weaponized it. That wasn't her fault. That was his crime, and now finally he would pay for it. Michael called her when the arrest happened. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Lily didn't die for nothing. We stopped him." Keisha cried. For Lily, for herself, for all the women who'd been too afraid to speak up. But these tears felt different. They felt like release. They felt like the beginning of healing. Chapter 10. Love found me. When I stopped looking. 6 months after Derek Winston's arrest, Keisha stood in her bathroom mirror applying lipstick, not for a date, but for a speaking engagement. She'd been invited to talk at a women's conference about resilience, about rebuilding after betrayal, about the power of speaking your truth, even when shame tells you to stay silent. Her savings account was back up to $8,000, slowly climbing toward security. She'd picked up extra shifts at the hospital and started a small side business teaching other women how to spot romance scams and protect themselves online. Bria had become her biggest supporter, helping manage her growing social media presence where she shared resources and warning signs. Their relationship had transformed, no longer mother and critic, but 2 women who'd learned to respect each other's journeys. Keisha had never felt more powerful or more herself, and she'd learned something crucial. She didn't need a man to feel complete. She'd been whole all along. She'd just forgotten because the world kept telling her otherwise. The conference was in Chicago, and Rhonda came with her for support. They sat in the hotel room the night before Keisha's talk, eating room service and laughing about hospital gossip. "You nervous about tomorrow?" Rhonda asked. Keisha shook her head. "Not anymore. I used to be afraid of people knowing what happened to me. Now I'm afraid of staying silent and letting it happen to someone else." The next morning, she walked on stage in front of 300 women and told her story. She didn't sugarcoat it or make herself look better. She talked about the loneliness, the desperation, the way Derek had studied her weaknesses and exploited them. She talked about the shame and the healing and the choice to stop hiding. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Dozens of women came up afterward to share their own stories, some about romance scams, some about other kinds of betrayal, all about learning to trust themselves again after being hurt. Keisha felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. After the conference, Keisha and Rhonda decided to explore Chicago before their flight home. They wandered through Millennium Park, took selfies in front of the Bean, ate deep dish pizza that made them groan about their diets. At a small coffee shop in Wicker Park, while Keisha was ordering a latte, someone tapped her shoulder. She turned to find a black man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair smiling at her. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice warm and nervous, "but I was at the conference yesterday. I'm a therapist, and I brought some of my clients to hear the speakers. Your story was incredible. The way you talked about rebuilding trust, it really resonated." Keisha felt her guard go up immediately, old wounds making her suspicious of compliments from strange men. But something about his energy felt different. No agenda, just genuine appreciation. "Thank you," she said carefully. I'm glad it helped. He laughed, sensing her wariness. I promise I'm not trying to slide into anything. I just wanted to say you're doing important work. I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus, her ex-husband's name. Life had a sense of humor. They talked for 20 minutes about his therapy practice, about the women he worked with who'd experienced financial abuse and romance scams. He gave her his card, Dr. Marcus Williams, licensed therapist, and suggested they might collaborate on a workshop series. No pressure, he said, but if you're ever interested in developing programming around this, I think we could help a lot of people together. Keisha took his card, genuinely intrigued by the professional opportunity, not thinking about it as anything more than that. Rhonda, watching from their table, raised her eyebrows suggestively. Keisha rolled her eyes. Don't even start, she said when she sat back down. He's a colleague, that's it. But Rhonda grinned. Girl, I saw how he looked at you. That wasn't just professional interest. Keisha laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Even if it was, I'm not looking for anything like that. I'm good on my own. Better than good. I'm thriving. And she meant it. She'd learned that her worth wasn't determined by whether someone wanted her romantically. She was valuable because of her strength, her resilience, her willingness to turn pain into purpose. 3 months later, Marcus reached out about the workshop idea. They met at a coffee shop in Detroit to discuss logistics, how to structure the program, which topics to cover, how to make it accessible to women who couldn't afford therapy. Their meetings became regular, then frequent. They talked about trauma and healing and second chances, and slowly, without Keisha even realizing it was happening, she found herself looking forward to their conversations, not because she needed him, but because she enjoyed him. Marcus was patient, never pushing, never demanding more than she was ready to give. He'd been divorced for 5 years, had a teenage daughter he adored, and understood what it meant to rebuild your life after someone broke your heart. Their first actual date happened almost by accident. A work meeting that turned into dinner that turned into walking around downtown Detroit talking until midnight. Is this okay? Marcus asked at one point, his hand brushing against hers. I don't want to assume anything. Keisha smiled, taking his hand fully. It's okay. I'm ready. Finally. Their relationship grew slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect rather than desperate loneliness. Marcus met her children and genuinely liked them, even Bria with her sharp edges. He came to her speaking engagements and beamed with pride in the front row. He never asked her for money, never created emergencies, never made her feel like she had to prove her worth. He just loved her, simply, honestly, showing up consistently in ways that rebuilt her trust in people. 6 months into their relationship, Keisha posted a photo of them together on Facebook with a simple caption. They said I was too old to find love. Turns out I wasn't too old. I was just looking in the wrong places. Real love doesn't slide into your DMs with practiced lines and sob stories. It shows up in coffee shops and therapist offices and quiet conversations about healing. It's built on friendship, respect, and choosing each other every day. I'm 54, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because a man completed me, but because I completed myself first. The post went viral, shared thousands of times by women who needed to hear that their stories didn't end at 50 or 60 or any age where society tried to make them invisible. Derek Winston was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. Keisha attended the sentencing hearing, staring at the man who'd stolen her money and her trust. He looked small in his orange jumpsuit, nothing like the silver-haired charmer he'd pretended to be. When the judge asked if any victims wanted to make impact statements, Keisha stood up. She looked Derek in the eyes and said, "You tried to break me. You studied my loneliness and used it as a weapon. But you failed, because I took the worst thing that ever happened to me and turned it into my purpose. I've helped 37 women avoid falling for scams like yours. I've spoken to thousands about resilience and self-worth. You wanted to destroy me, but instead, You woke me up. So thank you. Thank you for showing me how strong I actually am. Derek looked away, unable to hold her gaze. As Keisha walked out of that courtroom, Marcus waiting for her in the hallway, she felt something finally close inside her. The chapter that had been defined by shame and betrayal. A new chapter was opening, one written on her terms, where she was the author of her own story. And this time, she wasn't waiting for someone to rescue her. She'd already rescued herself.